Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we are going to do our first Christmas card design because I know lots of you are wanting to get organised and get ahead with your cards. Now if you're going to paint every single card you need a design that you can repeat quickly and easily. So today we're going to look at some really lovely simple Christmas tree designs. So grab your paints and let's get started. I have divided my page into 4 sections so I can show you some different Christmas trees. We're going to begin with a classic, probably the most sort of recognisably Christmas tree-like tree. And I've woken up the various greeny tones in my palette. So I've got my sap green here, then hooker's green, cobalt turquoise, and then up here I've got French ultramarine blue and Prussian blue. Now I know that my patrons often say my sap green is a lot more sort of bluey green than theirs. The one I use is Winsor & Newton Artist Quality. I know the Cotman sort of student quality version of this is a little more yellowy, so if you feel that your green is too yellowy, just pop in a little bit of Prussian blue or one of the bluey tones and you'll be sorted. So anyway, I'm just making up a piney green, so even with my sap green I want to add blue tones into it. So I've just got that all mixed up there, and I've got a sort of gradation scale here where I've got a more greeny end and a more bluey end, and I've got a size 0 brush, and what I've done here is I've just drawn a vertical pencil line, and that is going to be my guide for my first Christmas tree. So what we're going to do, size 0 brush, I'm going to start at the top and I'm just going to squish the brush down from the top in a little series of sort of thickening S-curves. And although I've got quite sort of solid dark paint on there, it's also quite wet. And then I'm going to come in from underneath there, just keeping the amount of water on my brush nice and sort of dilute. I'm keen to make sure we've got plenty of unpainted space in amongst here as well. So each layer, each kind of tier of the tree is sort of fairly distinct, and that pencil line really helps. And I'm just adding a little bit of the bluier green each time. I think the challenge with painting Christmas trees like this is to not go too wide too fast, because they obviously love big bushy trees, but you don't want to end up with a tree that's just about that wide. So just keep going until you reach a nice shape. Now we've got a really lovely sort of slightly rounded bottom of the Christmas tree, and what we can now do is paint in a simple pot underneath it. So I've gone for red, because this is quite a loose watercolour Christmas tree. I'm going to sort of have the pot painted in that style as well. So a little sort of horizontal line. So I'm just going to curve a little bit, and 2 lines just tapering inwards and curved along the bottom, and then just going to fill in like that. And if we want, you can always add a little bit more concentrated red. But essentially that is a really lovely simple loose watercolour Christmas tree that looks very much still like a Christmas tree. And once this is dry 100%, we can add a few decorations to it. But let's move on to the next one. So a slightly simpler tree. I am just going to draw a triangle, and you can see it's really basic, and the pot underneath as well. Really, really simple. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to fill it in just with clean water. So I'm going to change my water jars over, and I am going to carefully, make sure my brush is clean. I'm going to fill it in with water, being careful not to go over the edges too far. You could mask this off, but actually we're going to do a masked off tree, and what I really want to emphasize here is the sort of quite charming nature of a slightly wobbly, simple triangular shape. So I've just filled that all in with water, and if you are a bit sort of over enthusiastic with how much water you put on your page, you might want to give it a minute to just seep in. If you've managed to get that nicely sort of wet but not so that there's puddles or water flowing all over the place, then you're good to go. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some quite concentrated dabs of green, and we're just going to have a bit of fun placing them in on the tree. And what I want to do is create a green triangle with all these different greens. So it's really, really important that once you've dabbed the colour on, you don't, beyond like just doing a few little prods on the spot like that, little dabs on the spot, that you don't disturb it any further. That just means that it'll blend of its own accord, and we'll get these amazing feathery colour blends. But we're not poking it about too much, so then all the colours bleed into each other too far. So you just got to have a bit of patience and just let them do their thing. There is also the flip side, that if you're not fast enough, the paint might dry, the water might dry before you've had a chance to fill it all in. But we're going to leave that like that, and I'm going to do the same thing with the pot underneath. So just fill that in with water. A size 2 brush is really good for this, because it's small enough that you've got the control to really get the point of your brush into the corners, but large enough so you're not spending forever filling it in. And I think I'm going to get some of the pink tones awake as well as the red. It's good to have at least 3 different colours, I think. Okay. Obviously we've got a much smaller area, so we don't need nearly as many dots. Lovely, and we just wait for that to dry. My next tree involves using a bit of masking tape, so I'm just marking out a triangle shape. If you want to very, very faintly draw it out in pencil first, then that's absolutely fine. So just really press it down with your finger to make sure it's really sealed there, and that's why washi tape is so good compared to masking tape, because it's just a bit lower tack is what we call. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got all my different greens here, and I want to just paint some nice dilute lines. So I've got hooker's green to begin with. I could even use a larger brush, I think. Yeah, let's try a size 2. You just got to be sort of, you start to learn what your preferred brushes are when it comes to control. So we're just looking at a random assortment of lines. They don't even have to be the same thickness, but they're sort of angling off at different angles. And each layer I'm going to let dry, and then I'm going to paint in some more different colours over the top. So if you were doing a whole load of these cards, what you'd do is you'd mask off a whole load of trees, paint in all your one colour on all of them, and by the time you got to the last one, that first one would have dried, and then you could paint in your next colour. So that's the cool thing about this card design, is it feels like this one takes a little bit longer than the other two, but actually this is the beauty of doing a sort of mass production of cards. I've done 3 layers now, and I'm going to do the final one. I'd like to start, I think, with a size 0 brush. So I'm going to finish with my strongest, darkest layer, which is a classic sort of rule of watercolour, is just start with your lightest colours and build up layers until you're putting your darkest colours on. You don't need to completely fill every sort of white gap on your tree. When I say the white gaps, I mean the ones sort of at the edge, the masked off areas down the sides, but it is important to really fill in the corners so that you get your classic triangle tree shape. So by the time I get sort of halfway down, I like to switch up for my size 2 brush. So the colours I used, I started off with Hooker's Green, which is a really nice bright green, but I did it quite dilute. And then I moved on to Green Gold, which is the yellowy green you see here. And then I moved on to Cobalt Turquoise, and I'm finishing off with a Sap Green mix with French Ultramarine Blue. So just keep on changing the thickness of your lines and the angles, and that looks great. So we're not going to peel off the tape just yet, because we're going to do one last little bit with that, with the details we're going to do over the top. So we've got one last tree to go. The last tree, I start again with a vertical line and then draw horizontal to create a pot. But what I'm also going to do, just move this out the way, is I'm going to draw in, not paint in, some horizontal lines. Now, I like the idea that this tree is quite sort of symmetrical and things, so I'm actually going to measure these lines. So I'm going to make them this one 2 centimeters, then I'm going to make it just a little bit shorter than that. Let's go for that like there. So we've got 1.7. I'm terrible at maths, but it'll be around there. Then we'll have a 1.5. So we're just going up in steps. I'm just sort of judging it by eye in terms of the actual branches. But essentially we're getting a Christmas tree that's quite bushy, and we might make it just a little bit taller and pop in one more at the top. But you can see I'm sort of measuring it, but also not being too strict with things. And now we'll get our paints back in. Just as I turned the camera off, I realised it would be much more helpful if I just drew a line from there to the top to get myself a nice even distribution. Just shows I'm very much sort of discovering things as I go along, so hey ho. Anyway, so we've got our pencil lines, and I want to get a really nice deep dark greeny blue, so I'm definitely adding lots of French ultramarine into my sap green, and I think a size 0 brush should do the trick, but we might sort of find that we want to go even smaller. But let's have a go, shall we? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint along, and I'm going to do these kind of arrow markings. Again, doing it by eye, because the whole point of this is that these are quick Christmas trees. And I'm going to go up and down both sides, filling in these branches. And I've also just painted a line up the middle, and that's looking really nice. Right, to keep the theme, I'm going to stick with a red pot, and I'm just going to fill that in, and then we can move on to the decorations. Okay, so we're going to try out some different decorations. My metallic palette is in, but it's not going to be the only thing we use, because I know we don't want to have to rely on metallics every time. So we're going to begin down here with our little classic Christmas tree, and I'm just going to paint a cadmium yellow star by doing a line down to the side and another one to the side and out there. It's just quite a nice, helpful way to paint a really simple star, because sometimes simplicity is just the best. And when you're painting a tree like this, the beauty of it is we've painted it quite loose and quite wet, so even though it is a fairly dark green, we can still get away with layering up some watercolour on top. And that's alizarin crimson, and I'm just finding areas that I know it will show up nicely on, just drawing a little circle and allowing for a tiny bit of unpainted space. And if I'm painting that over a white bit of paper, then I know I'm going to get white underneath. But it's not the end of the world if you get a little bit of green underneath as well. So I'll pop in some red baubles as well. But yeah, this is your sort of archetypal classic Christmas tree illustration, I think. Lovely. Now, for this one here, I think it would be fun to continue with the rather sort of childish theme of the style of illustration. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some metallic gold, and I'm going to draw some squiggles. Oh, apologies, I think my dog is barking. Good old Crumble, guarding the house from the postman. And then just a little star on top. We can just do it really simply. I know some people find painting stars really hard, but something really simple like that is really effective on a design like that. Now down here we've kept the masking on because what I want to do is I want to flick some gold on in splatters. So I've just, well, we're always going to run the risk that there might be a splatter that goes a bit further afield, but if you are doing this you could always mask off and cover the larger area. I'm just getting some fairly wet gold on a largish brush. Whoops. and just gently flicking the bristles down. Now I think it could be fun to have a second colour. You can really go to town with that. And we'll let that dry. Thought I'd just clean up the splatters a tiny bit before I launched into the last one. So for the last one, I'm actually going to use a little bit of gouache, white gouache, to do some layering on top of the pot, because I want to do a slightly sort of Nordic design. And I want to do it in a sort of classic Christmassy white. So you can grab yourself a little bit of gouache, or some people like to use acrylic. I've used acrylic in the past. And just putting this on with a small brush, but it is quite thick paint, so just have to keep on getting your brush into a fine point. And then for the decoration on the tree itself, I'm going to, in a quite sort of stylized manner, paint in baubles in the same way that I painted them on the first tree. Just sort of at the ends of these horizontal lines. I'm just alternating them because I think it might be fun to do something different on the other side. So I'll just let that dry and then we'll paint in the other side. So I'm just alternating with a little yellow diamond shape, and then at the top I'm going to attempt a sort of a slightly stylized star. So I'm doing a sort of pointy figure of 8. There we go. And there we have 4 Christmas trees for you to paint over and over again for Christmas cards. So I'll just let everything dry, rub out the pencil, peel that off. Let's peel this off, yeah, and see what we're left with. Ooh, it's on so it's on so tight. Well, that's extremely satisfying, isn't it? Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that and it's inspired you to get painting for the holiday season. I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating these videos that everyone can enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, then hit the like button below and comment to let me know how you got on and which your favourite tree was. And of course, if you want to subscribe, then hit that subscribe button and the little notification bell and you'll never miss another video. Until next time, bye!